Good evening, everybody. System Jock here. We are on to the 38th of the Cultist Simulator Librarian run episodes at playing as Ivan Vucetich, the detective. So I took a quick look at my Excel sheet. So what I've called Continent 2, we should be getting Deoris, the Tantra of Worms, the Thirsting Tantra, and I believe it actually has another copy of the Mages von Brandt, which is not a unique text, and so we should be getting more than one copy of it. What that means is we will know Aramaic, Ficene, and, the other languages we already have, Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit, although in practice only the Ficene will matter. So what I was going to do, just to make sure that I don't have anything to worry about with the uniqueness, and again, I think I'm being overly cautious here. I'm waiting a little bit to before I bring in the cipher journal, just so that once we're finished studying this, I can once I finish studying this, I can read it. We don't need to worry about any conflicts as far as the duplication is concerned and all of that. And again, it's completely unnecessary, but I don't know. I don't want to go this far on the playthrough and then have like a simple trip up keep me from accomplishing what I was looking for. More importantly, the reason why I wanted to check out the Excel sheet that I had, again, the ones they should be getting from the continent: Book of True Blood, High Mysteries, Church Solar, Morphe Codex Against Sisterhood of the Knot, Deoris 2, Tantra of Worms, Thirsting Tantra. So those are the ones that we don't have. And the Mountains is Upon the Plain, Geminiad, Vinzant Inscriptions, Watchful Tantra, Deeds of the Scarred Captain, Devoured Tantra, Matthias and Amethyst Imago, Transformation, The World Does Not Weep, Irreproachable Traditions, On the Matter and Deeds of Serpents, Serenity of Blackwood, and the Ficene textbook. So after that, we either go to the Hebe Stanton or the Isles. Wait a minute. Why are the Isles? Oh, right. No, yeah, the Evening Isles are right at the end. Sorry, I've ordered these differently, so should be the Land Beyond the Forest next. But we'll worry about that later. I've got other stuff to do. The whole point of doing the stuff in between the sessions was so I didn't have to read that to everyone. But basically, we're going to be using these Forbidden Epics to get some new expeditions once we explore Fermier Abbey, and we'll explore Fermier Abbey once we have freed up the study verb. There's a little bit of a challenge in the sense that I will be letting the knock sort of rot, but we have 52 seconds with Leo anyway, so it's not like I would have been using that otherwise. So I think we were waiting for the Season of Despair to actually trigger before we went back to our inspector job. So I'll run with that right now. This illness has damaged my health. I will need to rest before I'm fully recovered. Cure your affliction with funds or vitality. We have the money for it, so I'll just spend, I'll spend the cash. Now we will use our troublemaker. So again, we don't have the same need for dread as we did, because once this passes by, it'll become a fleeting reminiscence, at which point we get rid of the we lose the fascination. The bigger one I should worry about is my notoriety. There is one sitting in the explore verb here. So in this case, Spencer Hobson or Connolly, either one of them are going to wind up getting some notoriety and potentially generating some evidence against me. Oh, actually, that's the other problem with holding like this. The experienced swindler is going to expire. I wasn't originally going to rehire them, but I think it might be a good idea. It's tempting to try and take a higher level one, but we're going to go for Time Chronicle. Last night, Gearby was talkative. He spoke in his siege engine voice of the histories he'd overheard in the waking world. I listened until his stories tailed off again into weeping. Okay, let's cure the affliction before we go any further. The medicine is dark and bitter as tar. It would be easy to suspect I'm being poisoned. Oh, you know what? I might have blown it as far as the influence is concerned. Alright, I've increased my knowledge of the secret histories behind the one we know. Okay, so Prince Alessandro Lacrosse spent years in secret study of the tablets taken from the Fucine marshes in central Italy. His work will allow you to decipher Fucine texts. So, it is something in common with Latin, and something else in common with the scratchings of maddened rats. So this is locked in, so now we can collect everything else. The Serenity of the Black Wood, an allegorical history of the House of Leith, who is here. It is here implied were inspired by the centipedes. Sereno Blackwood is an occult alias to this day. On the Matter and Deeds of Serpents, this was probably the Prophecies of the Naga, rendered into English and illustrated by William Midnight in Paris in the 1880s, but it shows a number of divergences from that text. It's certainly quite recent by the standards of VAC texts. The Irreproachable Traditions of the Society of Noble Endeavour, in Latin. So we'll see what we can do with... We know we're going to lose the Swindler at this point, which, it is what it is. Yeah, we'll see if we can do something with Neville and Enid. Robert Fermier spent much of his unsavory fortune on the endowment of this monumental forest-crowded abbey. The monks dislike visitors. Their ways are not exactly orthodox. They celebrate a certain harvest festival with unsavory vigor. So I guess we'll be able to use the experienced Swindler one more time after all. Fermier Abbey, folded into the forest like a jewel box smuggled in a green robe. If we can make it through the forest, we'll still have to face the monks. Cool. Expedition continues. Our expedition plans for the next challenge. It'll consume funds. I can add funds now, or I can send another follower. So we've already got the moth followers that we need. Spencer Hobson's on the case, so in this case they may lose it because of their erratic status. And again, I don't want to mess around with the investigation if I don't have to, due to the potential dread. Optimism is the spice which saves. So let's see whether or not we can level up. We'll start with the... Oh, you know what? Neville always gets overlooked. Let's level up Neville first. So if I just add the consent of wounds, that's not sufficient, and this is... right, yeah. So 21st intensity. So the consent of wounds gets... Oh yeah, actually I should have known this ahead of time. So we have to use the level 10 influence. Anything else is too low. Good to know. Leo is back on the case. So I would prefer to be leveling up the secret histories, but honestly, now is the time to read the Geminiad. Anything any later, and it's just going to keep us from leveling up our existing texts. Alright, the sick room grows close and stale. Time to get up. So we're free from worrying about the fascination, which means we can be a little riskier on our trips to the stag door. And in fact, I'm gonna keep a table. Excuse me. This is the second time in a row that I've lost my pencil for writing these things. So I'm just gonna look at the... Okay, it's not worth holding up the recording for. I'll look for it in between episodes. But I might get a notepad just to put down the combinations. It's mostly if there's a pattern, I want to write it down and not go on the basis of I think it might be, I think it may not be. I do notice I actually wrote down the track record of the it might be and it may not be, and I am usually too pessimistic. But for the most part, the hunches are actually right, and it doesn't surprise me because obviously I've played this game for 5 years, longer than that actually. And the game has changed, but it's not, it hasn't changed that much. So it is one of those things you want to quantify because you always remember the times that you were right and you always forget the times you were wrong. But yeah, I have noticed the hit rate is a bit better than I give myself credit for when it comes to the doors. There are a couple which do seem to be random, but or at least used to be, but yeah. Okay, anyways. What am I doing? It's a reason, not knock. The stag door is the adept's gate. To pass it is to be initiated in the first true mystery of the House of the Sun. The head Gearby weeps to see me enter where it cannot, but it must let me pass. The scarred valves of the door grind open. Alright, in places it overlaps with languages I know. In other places, well, I can see why they call it the tongue of witches, but I can understand it well enough now. So, we're going to use 2 more minutes to translate and study the Geminiad, so... a fragile manuscript illuminated with the twin shapes of sad and luminous beauty, and with all the phases of the moon. It might be as old as the 7th century, but the language we've seen is much older. Coral decorates its cover, and its page edges are sharp enough to slash a throat. Lock the study door, the work begins. So 45 seconds before we can work with the... I am actually slightly annoyed about not being able to find the pencil, but I think I know where it is. But I'm going to try not to let it distract me. It's only like 15 more minutes or something around that. Visions abate. These, the solidity of the everyday banishes phantoms. I tether myself to the everyday. And some days are better than others. Sometimes the sky is nothing like a filthy sheet. Sometimes the river runs clear. And I'm certain that my adversary has lodged a copy of their notes elsewhere, with their solicitor, with their superior, or even with a contact in the press. This is troubling. So I think I'm going to wait. There's no way we can wait 48 seconds, so we might as well do the investigation now. I think I'm going to try and wait to use the experienced swindler on this job. Alright, a light through the trees. There's something up ahead. We've made it through the forest. Great. In sleep, I wrap my fingers along the ridged edges of the stag door's scars. Our company it was that shattered it, Gearby says suddenly. Before the gods who were flesh, the mantis was forbidden to mortals. We were the first no. He begins again to weep his molten tears. I wish that we had not. I wish that I had died in the world. I have forgotten what else he said, but I remember the shape of the fissures in the stag door, and for all of today, doors will fear my touch. So this is one that we should be able to turn into a key. We technically only need 1 key, but we'll obviously go for more than 1. There was a strategy I was planning which would involve me going to the Evening Isles to try and get the Frangiclave as soon as possible, but it doesn't make any sense to do that because I'm not going to wind up at the Peacock Door. Okay, so let's bring in Neville as a key. As a reminder, Neville's gaze has grown furtive, and his voice is sometimes shrill. He speaks freely of his dreams. Only a rare few, those most suited to service in our mysteries, may achieve this rank. And I prepared the text for study. I made make notes towards a translation. Now I can study it. I believe this was one of the first. So if I recall correctly, in the prototype I played, you would get this in Strathcoins, and then it would be. It would specifically have a note in it saying that Fusine was not yet implemented. Now I don't recall when the Gemini had moved vaults, but you'll notice that some of it, like its status is like an early text to be translated. It still has the breadcrumb in it. I have made notes towards a translation. Now I can study it. I know I've pointed this out in a couple of playthroughs, but I kind of assume that not everybody watches all of these, but it's kind of fun. Again, the game has celebrated its 5-year anniversary rather recently, and it certainly gets me sort of reflective in terms of the game and the time that I enjoyed playing the early prototype. But it is sometimes fun to be able to play some games, particularly if you can actually notice this with trailers for some games too. One example I would take about this would be Lucifer Within Us, which wasn't necessarily all that well received when it came out. I think it's a shame. I actually thought it was an enjoyable game, and I felt the reasons people were criticizing it. I don't know. Like they didn't really feel just. It doesn't mean that like the game is above criticism. Most games do have areas that they can be improved, and obviously if you're a fan of a game, it can be difficult to see people have a negative opinion of something that you enjoy and potentially you've sort of invested some of your identity in. But the important thing to remember is that sometimes pointing this stuff out is a way that the game can be improved. But obviously when you're faced with unfair criticism, that's a bit of a different case. In any case, if you take a look at the trailer for the game, particularly some of the earlier trailers, you actually get to see some directions that the game had taken, and they chose to do differently for one reason or another. Again, it's not like there's features that are... This is the important thing. It's never going to be about features that are advertised. It's always about familiar scenes in the game that play out differently from how you get to play them in the final version. And that's the one that I always find the most interesting. So, in any case, there's just one of those little markers in here. When you think of it, right, once you've made it to the continent and you're translating books, you technically do not need this breadcrumb. But of course, when the breadcrumbs were being introduced, it made a lot of sense to include something like this. So, at least that's my reading of it. So, these pages outline the nature and the doctrines of an hour that demands the union of what is at rest, an hour that is sought at the water's edge and beneath the moon, the witch and sister. The language is naughty, poetic, willful. It'll take some time untangling. Oh. I also didn't realize that this takes longer than the other ones. I wonder if that's always been the case. Monks, a potent deception. We have brought... Oh, wait a minute. Oh, right, because it's like if we were to add another... It's because it's the monks. It's not... Yeah, okay. We've brought with us here certain sacred texts whose meaning is apparent only in moonlight. Sorry, for some reason I thought that it was a lesser... I thought it was a lesser moth response, when in practice it was just the... Excuse me. It was just the... it was the different obstacle. Sorry. Okay, so in Dream, I can afford to go after a riskier... door, let's say. And that's because I've got a fleeting reminiscence, which will be available after the... Like, so basically, if this had been a if this had been a fascination, it would be, I'd have 35 seconds left on the fleeting reminiscence. The painted river runs from a great chamber near the White Door, far through the mansus, to its far edge where it enters a painted delta of far cloud. I voyaged half its length last night with a stern-faced captain beneath a rust-red sail. As the clouds rose before us, the sailors raised a yearning shanty, and close-hauled the sails to best use the painted wind, and all the while the captain and I discoursed on the secrets of the House of the Sun. So, let's go... The monk's delusion. Faith is a double-edged weapon. These monks have a great talent in the matter of believing, and so they have believed our lies. No lock remains, no door remains, no gate remains, no wall remains. No fortress is closed against me, no country forbids me, no law binds but the law of the mother. I am a key, and this is my use. In his dreams, Neville often sees the flaws where the world and its ways can be opened. So I think we wait a little while before we send Leo out to pick up some evidence again. Oh yeah, actually we wouldn't do that anyway because we want to use the swindler to destroy the evidence. Possibly rehire them as well, but maybe we'll rehire them after they destroy the evidence. Let's give them an incentive to finish. Alright, treasures lie before us. Our expedition plans for the next challenge. It'll consume funds. I can add funds now or I can send another follower. Yes, we definitely need to add everyone. Investigations turned up no new leads. Okay. The Geminiad reminds us that the witch and sister has been known to manifest as the sister and witch, and that this face may heal while the other face is always hungry. It implies connections between the witch and sister and the hours of the wood, especially the secret keeper called the Velvet. But it is ambiguous on whether the witch and sister is a wood hour proper, and it speaks at length about the sadness of the two who are one, the sadness that remains from their time as flesh. Ah, I didn't realize that I got a... That's interesting. There are definitely some possibilities here. Okay, so... the rite of the crow's quenching. This rite calls for the beach crow at sunrise or moonrise. The crow accepts the sacrifice and returns the gifts of the earth. I completely forgot that there is a rite that you get in the Geminiad. So, this opens up a lot of possibilities for us. Geminiad Red, a fragile manuscript illuminated with the twin shapes of sad and luminous beauty, with all the phases of the moon. Coral decorates its cover, and its page edges are sharp enough to slash a throat. I've learned everything I can from this, but the book itself still has power. Now, obviously there are uses that I have for this, but there's a much more important use that I can get out of it. So we've got the Moldy Warp admonitions. Moldy Warp keeps her crowns and in the moss and her feet in the dirt, and the trees lockjaw tight. Moldy Warp has these warnings for you. The Thakic Invocation. Raucous shrieks attend the passage of the names of the Grail. We reproduce them as best as we can for the pulsating power they lend. And the Geminate Invocation. The Sister in Witch has always been invoked for protection at crossroads and at moonrise, and where the land shelters the sea. I should think about this as... Right, okay. I messed up the position. So, what I want to do with these, I'm going to devolve them to their lesser elements. And I'm going to use them to feed the consent of womb. Actually, I can do that with, is there a convenient way for me to do this? Sorry, this is going to involve some thinking. So, if I can divide this into two... I can divide this into two sixes, this into two sixes, this into two sixes. So what I actually need here... Yes, I think one of them gets left behind no matter what. But I'm thinking we take, let's say, the Moldy Warp admonitions, just for the sake of the argument. We break that down into a couple sixes to advance the consent of wounds. then using the Consent of Wounds, we can turn the Thakic Invocation and the Geminate Invocation into Knocklore. Although we only really need one of them to be turned into Knocklore, I suppose. Yeah, so this is the real shame here. Like, if we had some way of being able to preserve all of these as 8s, we would actually be able to turn this. So we could go 8. So from like assuming that this was an 8, so 8 to 10, 10 to 12, and then 12 to 14. Wait a minute. What is the highest level again? I think it's 16. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is a way I can go from the Consent of Wounds to something else. Because like what I could do here, so let's say I break all of these down. So I'd have 6 6s, so 7 total potential consent of wounds. Well, again, I still need 2 to move them up. So that doesn't really get me anything. So yeah, one of them I need to break down, the other one I need to go. And again, it depends. If there's another opportunity for me to read a text, then, you know, I may want to choose something that can be, you know, converted or whatever. But honestly, it is not worth that much heartache. I think devolving one of them down into something, using that to elevate the Consent of Wounds, so yeah, I think the way that it's going to go here, devolve Consent of Wounds. Okay, devolve 1, Consent of Wounds goes up, Consent of Wounds with Thakic or Geminate, doesn't really matter, goes up to 10. And we're not going to be able to improve off of any of these others because one's going to be too low and the Grail's going to... Okay, that's fine. So let's break down the Moldy Warp Admonition. Sometimes I might need to return to a more basic understanding of a particular piece of lore. Sorry for the time that took. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing an obvious improvement that I could make. Beneath the boughs, the monks and their miseries lie behind us. Here in their chapel courtyard, a great yew rises inside a granite altar. Okay, well, clearly we want to improve Enid, so we'll read this first. In sleep I ran my fingers along the ridged edges of the stag door scars. Our company it was that shattered it, Girby says suddenly. Before the gods who were flesh, the mansis was forbidden to mortals. We were the first no. He begins again to weep his molten tears. I wish that we had not. I wish I had died in the world. I've forgotten what else he said, but I remember the shape of the fissures in the stag door, and for all of today, doors will fear my touch. So we might as well improve Enid. This is certainly a lot earlier than I was expecting it, but I'm happy to take advantage of the improvement. So, exalted disciple to a key. Only a rare few, those most suited to service in our mysteries, may achieve this rank. Enid sees what others do not. It is becoming difficult for her, but it is very useful. Still not ready to do an investigation yet. So similar reasoning behind waiting on the investigation. We want to make sure that we can put the Season of Despair behind us. Okay, beneath the boughs. The space inside the altar is filled with broken cups, everyone painted red, everyone scrawled with vile graffiti, and otherwise... Oh yeah, sorry, I should have read the text before. The monks and their miseries lie behind us. Here in their chapel courtyard, a great yew rises, beside a granite altar, lidded like a sarcophagus. What's within? The space inside the altar is filled with broken cups, everyone painted red, everyone scrawled with vile graffiti, and otherwise befouled. The monks must have held great ceremonies of detestation, and kept the remains as trophies. Buried among the cup corpses are other treasures. So we've got the Thirsting Tantra. C.G. Burial, the temperance campaigner, published elements of this in a pamphlet, which had to be withdrawn and destroyed after it became too popular. One of my favorites, the Magus von Brandt's authentic and unique account of the true tongue of the true holy land of the Highmost. Written excitably and in some haste by a gentleman in the grip of transcendentalist enthusiasm, but nevertheless a useful guide to Aramaic. Huh. Against the sisterhood of the knot and the foulness of their depraved customs, Hieronymus Hypnertomachus wrote this furious screed about the sinister influence of the sisterhood on his own church of the unconquered sun. The Tantra of Worms. The entomologist Juliana Zawistowski eventually came to insist that this text was written by insects inhabiting a human skin. She has never presented evidence for her claim. And Deoris Volume 2. In Latin, a 19th century reprint by the indefatigable Nathaniel Darcy Evers of a 14th century Latin translation of a 4th century work. And we've got Rose Pearl Dust, leftover funds. And unfortunately we lose the experienced swindler because I wanted to... obviously getting a key overrode... overrode keeping the swindler. So we're going to need someone to destroy the tentative evidence, but we have the potential to summon something. So we would need the invocation using lore, we would need the influence, and an offering. Okay. So this is actually going to be a bit more complicated than it seems. So I'm not at all worried about being able to get... we've got plenty of offerings as a result of our ingredients. We have more ingredients than we know what to do with. The bigger challenge is getting the influence that I can work with in time. So for instance, if I want a raw profit, right, I need a certain set of things, and that's different from from getting, say, a maid in the mirror. Now I got a couple things that can help, right? So okay, erudition, lesson learned. I don't have... Actually, maybe that's a reason for us to keep the Thakic invocation, then. It's like we could get a percussagant with the Geminid invocation, but the Thakic invocation would allow us to summon a raw prophet on a fairly regular basis. I suppose breaking apart the moth might have been a bit premature. Anyways, something to think about a little bit later. This was a really good turn for us, though. Because, yeah, I did know the Geminiad would give... I did know that the Gemini would give me some lore, which I was counting on to be able to improve the knock, but I'd completely forgotten that it gives me that much lore. So what this means is that I can go further through the Mansis, and it means that I can potentially summon some stuff, which I'd kind of resigned myself to. So, good news overall. Excuse me. I'm going to go and find my pencil. But obviously it's time to wrap up for tonight. I may also take a break between recordings just because it is rather late. I have some other stuff that I wanted to get through tonight. And if I get a better sleep schedule, it means I can do more videos in the long run. Excuse me. I found that as much as I think I'm getting work done working late, what's really happening is I'm sleeping later. And I'm productive during the night, but if you sleep the day away, you just don't get as much done as you think you do. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.